And I was really like, how is this Montana then more diverse than Montana now? But my understanding of what that place was. Because if you erase people, then you can claim, well, it's always been ours.
What's good? I'm Nikisha Elise Williams, and this is Black and Published, bringing you the journeys of writers, poets, playwrights, and storytellers of all kinds. Today's guest is Victor LaValle, author of the horror novel Lone Women. The release of this novel marks Victor's 25th year as a working, published author. And it's all thanks to a lucky break from a friend who admired him for one trait.
She said, in class, you were never a dick. And she said, you were harsh, you were a good critic, but you were never a dick. And I wanted to help. And I always tell my students, writers we are thin-skinned, we are petty, and we will remember someone being awful for a long, long time. And on the other side, the better side is we will also remember someone being good.
Despite looking for goodness in the world, Victor says he writes horror because it tells the truths that other books won't. How growing up around mental illness as a child has informed his work. Plus, his one memory from 7 years old that taught him about shame, embarrassment, and the function of mob mentality. And why he believes the greatest horror in life is when the people who are supposed to love you and care for you don't. Victor explains his truth about the world next, when Black and Published continues. We're just going to jump in. So, Victor, when did you know that you were a writer?
I knew I wanted to be a writer probably at around 10 years old. And it was really because I loved reading so much. And I basically wanted to see if I could give someone else the same feeling that the comics and the books I was reading gave me.
So then when did you start trying to give people that feeling that you were getting from the comics and the books that you were reading? What was some of the first things that you wrote?
So I started writing stories right about then, maybe 11 years old. But the first thing I started writing for money was love letters. And I would charge my friends $1 a letter. And they would tell me who they wanted to write to. It would be, a girl in our class, that kind of thing. And I would write a letter for them for $1 and we would see how it goes. So that was like when I was doing it for someone else, because the stories I was writing by myself, I didn't share.
Why?
At 11, 12, they were not good. I knew they were not good. That was it. Then maybe about 15 was the first time I think I was about 15, the first time I wrote a story and I sent it to a magazine to get published. And it was rejected. But what was amazing about it was this real small magazine. I still remember it was called Grew Magazine because I was writing horror even back then. And what was amazing about their rejection letter, they sent it back to you and it looked almost like a questionnaire. And it would say how did the author do with, and then it would say plot. And there was 4 steps: strong, weak, unconvincing. And it would go down all the things that they were looking for in a story. And, they say plot, nothing, this, good, whatever like that. And the editor had checked it off all the way down. And then at the bottom, she wrote, "This is really auspicious work from someone so young," because I think I'd written in my letter that I was 15. And it felt good because she wrote that note. But even more, the bigger thing was their sheet broke down all the things that go into a story, because it's all the things they were looking for. And I started to use that. I said, oh, okay, this is how I need to think about how you build a good story. Do I have a sense of style? What is my style? Are the characters flat or complex? Is there a good description of the background, of the details of place and things like that? Is there much use of sound or any other details besides visual details? And that was all in there. And so in a weird way, it was like my first writing school.
So then from that amazing rejection letter, did you then decide that as you would go forward with your education, college, whatever, that writing would be the thing that you would pursue to tell good stories?
It was the thing that I knew I wanted to do, for sure. I mean, by the time I got to college, I knew I wanted to be a writer, but what that meant was a little bit loose. And then if I'm being totally honest, I had a pretty bad college experience. I really kind of I kind of cracked up, to be honest. Like by sophomore year, I was just like flailing, just not doing well. And then I got kicked out junior year because my grades were so low. I was not taking it seriously by that point.
So when did you take it seriously?
After I got kicked out, uh, so I got kicked out, and I had this dean pull me into his office, and he basically said, "As long as I'm at this school, you will never graduate. I will make it a point that you never graduate from this school. Like essentially, you're such a failure, and you've been getting this scholarship money, and you've wasted the money and all this kind of stuff." And I had never met him. This is literally the first time I meet him, and he just said, "You're a waste of our time and money. Now get out." Right. So I was like, okay. So I got out, and I got a job. I was working for Manpower temp agencies, and I worked moving furniture, cleaning offices, whatever it might be. And I did that for, I want to say, just maybe 5-6 months. Right. And I was just trying to figure out, what do I do? What do I do? Now I'll take it seriously if you let me back, kind of thing. And I kept a little bit of an eye on things back at the school. And then I saw that dean was on leave for a semester. And so I went back to the school, and a woman named Dean Janice Turner, she let me in her office because this other dude was gone. And she said, "Are you going to do, like, I see how things went, but just tell me now, has the time away? Do you feel like you can really just do this now and like graduate?" And I said, "Dean Turner, I promise you, if you let me back in, I will not mess up again." And she let me back in, and really, really saved the trajectory of my life. I didn't start immediately writing, but I started taking my classes seriously. I was an English major, so I started reading again, getting all that together. And then I was just about to graduate, and I knew I really do have to make this writer's dream kind of work. But I didn't feel like I had spent the time as an undergrad preparing myself for it. So a friend who was in an MFA program at my school said, "Why don't you apply to an MFA program? And at the very least, it'll give you 2 more years to just write and just practice, work on the writing." And so that's what I did. And so when I showed up at my graduate program, I was a totally different person.
So then when you got into your MFA program and you had the 2 more years to work and to write and to really study craft, is that when you first began working on the ecstatic?
The first thing I worked on was a book of short stories called Slapboxing with Jesus.
Yeah.
Yes. And a shout out to Ghostface Killer. That's a line from him. You know, one funny story about the graduate program. So I did say to myself, when I get there, I'm going to be such a pro, mostly because I assumed everybody else who's showing up, they were like, top students as undergraduates. They've been writing since they were 10, and I'm playing catch up. So the summer before, I had a job on campus at my school after I graduated, and it was at the library. So I was just sitting at the front desk. So I was just writing stories every day then. Like I come in and write. And so I said, when I show up on that first day of workshop, I'm going to have 20 copies or whatever it is, 15 copies of a story in my bag. So when they say, "Who's ready to hand in?" I'm going to be the first one to raise my hand. That's how I'm going to show everyone I'm serious, just like they are. So we get to that first day of workshop, and the professor says, "Okay, so we have to make up a schedule for people handing stories. Who's got some stories?" And I look around and I see all these people hesitating, looking down at their table, all this kind of stuff, right? And I go, "Wait a second." And then she says, "How about if we give it 2 weeks before people start to hand in?" And then people were like, "Just 2 weeks?" And I said, "Oh, they're not serious. I'm more serious than them." And it was such a gift, and the story I turned in was not even a good story. But it was that moment of me sitting there going, they don't have a head start on me because they weren't working as hard as me, at least in that 3 months, And in a weird sort of way, from that point on, I almost felt like I started grad school like 2 laps ahead of everybody else, just on the confidence level.
So first, I want to let you know that I had a guest on the show earlier this season, a Nigerian guy who, when I asked the question, what was his favorite book, he named your collection Slapboxing.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's amazing.
And in reading your latest book, Lone Women, is it Chris Jackson wrote this note in the beginning?
Yes.
Yeah.
It should be. Yeah.
He talks about working with you for like 2 decades now.
Yeah, that's right.
You've been serious since that first summer, since grad school. So then Coming out of grad school, having the confidence that you did, writing the stories, putting in the work, was it always, graduate, get published, do the thing?
Well, that was definitely my plan, but the way the path actually worked to getting that first book published was so I put the book together over the course of the 2 years there. My professor, the last semester I was there, a writer named Maureen Howard, who has since passed, she said, I really like these stories. You should send them to my agent and see if she likes them. And I sent them to her agent, a woman named Gloria Loomis, who is my agent to this day. She brought me in. She said, I really like these stories. I think they're really strong. Here's a few things I think you could improve. Why don't you take the summer? Because I graduated maybe in May and I met her then. She said, why don't you take the summer, come back in September, and we'll send these out. We'll try to get these published. I ended up taking a year because as she gave me these notes, as I was looking at it more with a little time and distance, I saw there was more I could do. They could be better and better. And then I finally, after a year, I came back to her and I said, I think these are ready. You take a look. She read them. She said, I agree with you. I think they're great. And then she sent them out to, I want to say, 10 editors at 10 different houses, and they all said no. Some of them said no in a very generic form letter way. Some of them said no in a, like, praising it, but just saying, I can't see how we'll sell it, that kind of thing. And then one of them said no in a really insulting way. Like, this isn't the right kind of Black story, essentially. Like, I know things are hard for these kids, but it should be worse. It's not believable that it's not worse. And the stories in the book, the kids go through some pretty bad stuff. So I was really like, I don't understand. How much more do you want to put these little Black kids through? But nonetheless, so they all said no. So the agent said, maybe you should just start working on the next book. And then if we sell the next book, we can come back around and do this.
Collection, yeah.
Yes, but maybe that'll be the way. And I was so depressed because I had just spent 2 years working on this thing and essentially felt like people were saying, nah, doesn't matter. So I go out to a party for a bunch of us who graduated from the program. And there's a woman there, a fellow student named Heather Clay, who's since published a novel some years ago. I tell her what was going on. And she said, I have a friend who just got a job at Vintage Books, which is the paperback arm of Knopf. Mm-hmm. And they're about to restart their vintage original lines, which was big. They did it in the 80s. That was how they launched all these like downtown white cool kid books that people wouldn't spend $25 on a hardcover for because they were new, but they might pay $10 for a paperback original. She said, my friend Jenny just got a job there. Jenny Minton is her name. Maybe you should just mail it to her. Just send it to her. And so I sent her the book, just myself. And then she called me maybe a week later and she's like, I want to publish this book. And that's how my book got published.
Come on, friends.
So, and the funny thing is, and I tell this story sometimes, I don't know if I'm allowed to curse at all on this.
Say what you want to say.
So I tell this story to my students when I teach, because I said to Heather some years later, whenever we saw each other again, I said, Heather, like you changed my life. That was a life-changing event that you passed me on to her. But why did you do it? Like, I mean, it was a party. Why bother? And she said, in class, you were never a dick. And she said, you were harsh, you were a good critic, but you were never a dick. And I wanted to help. And I always tell my students, like, writers are, not all, but many, we are thin-skinned, we are petty, and we will remember someone being awful for a long, long time. And on the other side, the better side is we will also remember someone being good and try to take care of them, try to look out. So like that was the big thing. So it was this really weird path to getting that book published.
Yes, Erica said, we're sensitive about our shit.
Yes.
So then what is it about horror that like really excites you to write the kinds of stories that you write? I watched the video that's connected to Lone Women where you talk about, if you dress whatever social societal ills up in horror, it's more easily digestible. Is it that just the reason, or do you just like trying to scare the shit out of people?
I do love scaring people. It does make me very happy personally. But, I do think the other thing about, to go back a ways, like Um, as a kid, I fell in love with reading partly because I grew up in a house with I would say, a good bit of mental illness.
Mm.
And so there was a lot of unpredictability sometimes. But what I found was if you put a book up in front of your face, people leave you alone. It's kind of a wall or a shield, or it can be, not always, but it can be, because there was a way that was sort of like, well, I guess it's good to be reading, so I'm going to leave you alone.
Mm-hmm.
And so I fell in love with reading partly because I love stories, but also for self-protection, right? But the other thing that drew me particularly to horror was maybe in part because of the house I grew up in. When things are so unpredictable, the only genre that seemed to me like life was the kind of genre where one day you walk into your apartment and everything's fine. And then another day you open the wrong closet door and there's a werewolf in there. And that, for me, reflected what it could feel like to be home with certain family members, depending on the day,
Mm.
you know? And so, in a weird sort of way, I felt like horror told me the truth in a way that most other stories didn't. Because most other stories would be like, well, there's this kid who wants to go to the store and has to buy groceries for mom. And then they go to the store and then they come home and then they have a hug with mom. And I would kind of be like, how come mom doesn't throw the groceries out the window because she says they're poisoned? Because that for me could happen. Or how come the kid doesn't come home and find that all the doors are locked and won't be opened? And so they have to sit outside until someone's mood changes. So, like, all of that stuff was part of what horror to me did right. It just said, like, sometimes terrible things happen and you have to find a way to work through it. And sometimes you win and sometimes it kills you. And that's just it, you know? And so I loved horror for that more than anything else. So it's fun. It lets you talk about societal issues, political issues, whatever you want to call it, without having to say it so openly that it sort of makes people shut down because they feel like it's vegetables, like they're eating vegetables. And third, I just really felt like I think horror is the closest to what the world feels like, at least when I was a kid.
So I did notice that in Lone Women, the societal issues or even just what's happening in history is really in the background. It's just like a line or two, and then we're back into the narrative. Like you don't really notice it. And I'm like, I see what you did there. Like it's just little nugget, and then we go back to the story. What was it about telling a story outside of New York City that made you say, I want to stretch myself in this way with horror?
The book right before this was a novel I published in 2017 called The Changeling. That was like a very New York centric story. And so I was a little tired of New York. I'd written 5, 6 other books that were all set in New York and started to feel like I would love to just try a different place, try a different thing. And then by chance, I did an event at the University of Montana years ago, like a decade ago. And whenever I go someplace that I think I probably won't be back to again, I try to go to a bookstore and buy at least one book from their local history section, just so I learned something about that place later where I was. So the book I picked was this book called Montana Women Homesteaders, A Field of One's Own. And I just picked it off the shelf because I didn't know anything about women homesteaders. I didn't know they existed. Like all I had was, I would say, popular entertainment, movies, TV, and it was always white dudes out in the West. Maybe it might be a white family. But even then it was like, well, but the white dude's the point. The ladies just like taking care of the house or something.
Yeah.
And then I started reading this book and it was all about these women who went alone to Montana in the 1900s to make a place for themselves. And I was really like, wow, this is amazing. And then even more amazing, as I read about it, I was like, my own biases were in there because I was like, okay, so these were all white women. And then I read them more and I saw, no, there were some Black women. There were Chinese women out there, although they weren't allowed to own land because of the Chinese Exclusion Act that came into existence around then. There were Latinos, there were Japanese people. And I was really like, how is this Montana then more diverse than Montana now? And then I said, well, maybe that's not a mistake. Maybe these things are purposeful, you know, and not just like the makeup of the state now, but my understanding of what that place was, you know. Because if you erase people, you can claim, well, it's always been ours, right?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, even before all of them is the native people who were the indigenous folks who were there, who were utterly erased. And so all of this was so interesting to me. And as some kid from New York, I really felt like I was so ignorant about it all. But then I wrote to the folks in Montana who I got to know when I made that visit, a couple professors and stuff like that. Some who had been born and raised in Montana, some who had come there. And I said, did you know about any of this stuff? And every single one of them was like, I have never heard of any of that. And that's when I said, oh, then I might have a story to tell. It's not just me who's ignorant of this. And so, like, the one rule I made for myself when I was putting the book together was, I'm not going to make up anything except for the really one impossible thing in the book. Like, everything else in this book can be fact checked, and you will find out that it's true.
Oh, I'm about to go nerd out when we finish this interview and go look up everything that I have questions about. Oh my gosh. I think one of my favorite lines in the book is from the Chinese character Fiona Wong. And it's at a critical point in the book. And this white lady's trying to say that she's from China or somewhere. And she says, bitch, I'm from Butte.
Yeah.
I laughed out loud. I love that. So since we are here now, can you read a little something from Lone Women, and then we can get into these women that you have created?
Yes, absolutely. I would love to.
It's 1915 in Victor LaValle's Lone Women, and Adelaide Henry is headed to Montana to homestead her way to the life she's always wanted, free of her family's peculiar ways. But when she arrives with a steamer trunk too heavy for most men to lift, Adelaide and those around her realize she's packed her problems, and setting them free may do more harm than good. Here's Victor.
How about I read right from the start?
Let's go.
There are two kinds of people in this world, those who live with shame and those who die from it. On Tuesday, Adelaide Henry would have called herself the former, but by Wednesday, she wasn't as sure. If she was trying to live, then why would she be walking through her family's farmhouse, carrying an Atlas jar of gasoline, pouring that gasoline on the kitchen floor, the dining table, dousing the settee in the den? And after she emptied the first Atlas jar, why go back to the kitchen for the other jar, then climb the stairs to the second floor, listening to the splash of gasoline on every step? Was she planning to live or trying to die? There were 27 Black farming families in California's Lucerne Valley in 1915. Adelaide and her parents had been one of them. After today, there would be only 26. Adelaide reached the second floor landing. She hardly smelled the gasoline anymore. Her hands were covered in fresh wounds, but she felt no pain. There were two bedrooms on the second floor, her bedroom and her parents'. Adelaide's parents were lured west by the promise of land in this valley. The federal government encouraged Americans to homestead California. The native population had been decimated, cleared off the property. Now it was time to give it all away. This invitation was one of the few that the United States extended to even its Negro citizens. And after 1866, the African Society put out a call to colonize Southern California. The Henrys were among the hundreds who came. They weren't going to get a fair shot in Arkansas. That was for damn sure. The federal government called this homesteading. Glenville and Eleanor Henry fled to California and grew alfalfa and wild grass, sold it to cattle owners for feed. Glenville studied the work of Luther Burbank, and in 1908, they began growing the botanist's Santa Rosa plums. To Adelaide, the fruit tasted of sugar and self-determination. Adelaide had worked the orchards and fields alongside her daddy since she was 12, labored in the kitchen and the barn with her mother for even longer. 31 years of life on this farm. 31. And now she would burn it all down.
Thank you. So I actually want to start at the end because you end the book with the last two lines. History is simple and the past is complicated. But to what you said just a while ago about erasing things and erasing people, I wonder in those lines, are you really saying history is simplified because the past is complicated?
Absolutely. I turned it into a little bit of a refrain in the book, comes up a couple of times, right? But the idea I definitely wanted to get at was just the, the difference between the history books and the past. And what made me so excited to write this book was that I had never heard this history. This is, the beautiful thing is in more recent years, you have all types of popular entertainment books, podcasts unearthing this history and telling these stories. Maybe one of the more famous ones being Watchmen in the last couple of years doing the bombing of Black Wall Street. And it was also in Lovecraft Country. And what I loved about Watchmen like begins with that. Like that's the first thing. And you might almost think it's a historical show about that. Whereas Lovecraft Country, I think, builds to that, right? But the beautiful thing is either way, the history is going to come out. Right. And that was my feeling. It was just like the simplification of history in textbooks always has a way of simplifying things with a particular slant. Mm-hmm. I mean, I wouldn't even call it out if it turned out like all of the stories were simplified, but we get tons of stories about like the grim determination and the profound courage of, say, the homesteaders. But then we don't say, but then they did also like murder whole families and steal land. That part doesn't come up.
Yeah. What it reminded me of, especially after I finished the book and then thinking about Lovecraft Country, was that how in Lovecraft Country, when you had the scary monsters, it was the white people that were scarier than the monsters. Yes. And the same thing is happening in Lone Women, especially once they reveal themselves as racist vigilantes, murderers, is that they're not as scary as the monster that's like being a monster in the book. But also, I'm trying not to give it away, but I do want to ask.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, it's like it's built in. That mystery is built in there, but it is hard to discuss.
Like you start the book and you think, I thought one thing, like even from the section that you read, and so I can say, I started that. I read, it's like, oh, did she kill her parents? Oh my God, what's happening? What's going on? And then you get to the end of the book and it's like, wait, this is a whole other kind of story. So I'm trying to dance around it. But I want to ask, why make these monstrosities family? I think that's the best way I can ask it the question without giving anything away.
Well, I guess in a way, one of the things that interests me very much is talking about the ways that someone outside the family harms family. But then I'm deeply invested in telling the truth about how within family we hurt each other, right? And how we misunderstand each other, mistreat each other, all the rest. And that on some level, like the deepest horror, to me at least, is when the people who are supposed to love you and supposed to keep you safe are the ones who don't. And like just trying to think about like part of the reason why I say that story hits people so hard or lasts as long as it does is because it really is terrifying to think about that idea, like the abuser is inside your home. So that wasn't the path I was taking exactly, right? But I did want to make it that like no one's hands were completely clean, right? Even Adelaide, I like the stories where even the main character who I want to identify with, at a certain point, I have to show that they have flaws. They hurt people too. Or they look out for themselves instead of looking out for someone else. But do they stay that way?
What I loved about Lone Women, and especially what you just said, is that everybody, to a degree, is complicit in the wrongs that are happening for one reason or another. But what you just said about, the character who did the least wrong is finally able to let out their rage. One of your characters, another Black woman, her name is Bertie Brown in the book. She says, my whole life, I felt like doing this, but it wasn't allowed. Was that a way for you to comment on the rage that Black women aren't allowed to express, and then in general, Black people aren't expected to express, especially against like white racism? Because then you say again toward the end on page 276, it's like, if by chance someone was to call these women thieves and arsonists, well, at least they weren't a fucking lynch mob.
Yes, I mean, I certainly, specifically, I would say, because I put those lines in Bertie's mouth because I did want to talk about that. And in fact, the thing I was thinking about, like one of my deepest childhood memories is being, I don't know how old, 7 or 8 years old, something like that, with my mom. We go to the supermarket to buy something, whatever it is. So we buy some stuff, and my mom's card gets declined for whatever reason. But the cashier, in my memory at least, she's enjoying like shaming my mother for it. She's really telling her, I don't know what's wrong, but your card is no good. And it's a crowded supermarket. So, my mother's feeling that shame. But the one thing I will say about my mother is she did not hide how she felt. So she starts yelling at the woman. But then I could see in the moment, like everyone there turning on her, like turning on my mom, like either the most basic one is just like, lady, would you just hurry up so we can just get out of here? I want to respect that. There are some people who just are in a hurry. But then there are other people that just looking at my mom like, what's wrong with you? You're like, it's just one of my deepest memories of like, oh, this is the face. This is how they really feel about my mom. When they don't have like one little overstep. She raises her voice in the supermarket. And those faces, that's how they actually feel about my mom, deep down. And then the cashier took extra pleasure. She cut the credit card right there, which is that thing they used to do. I don't know if they still do it, but I remember they used to do that. And the whole point is to shame, is to shame the person at that point, shame my mom at that. So she cuts the card right there. She's like, I have to cut this card because it's been declined. And my mom is like yelling at her, but she's also clearly almost in tears. She's so embarrassed. This happened right in front of her son and in front of all these people in the neighborhood where we live. So she's going to see them again. And that's just stayed with me so deeply as a memory. And I felt like when Bertie says that, I was remembering my mom in that moment in the supermarket and the way that like her very fair anger, like even to say it's been declined, you can say that nicely. Do you have a different card? Do you have cash? You could just do that with respect to another human being. But this cashier knew she didn't have to. And so she could do this to my mom. And so that's the beginning of that. But obviously, like over many, many, many years of seeing lots of different versions of this. And so what I kind of wanted was at that moment, this bloody, horrible thing has happened. And in theory, in I think a more traditional story, this would be the moment where somebody says, oh no, we're just as bad as they are. Oh no, we lashed out as well. Rage is never the answer. And I wanted Bertie, the Black woman there, to say, oh, this is great. And I only wish I could have done this to these people. Like that's all. And I felt like, say it. Just let Bertie say it.
But even in that scene of comeuppance, there is still mercy,
Mm-hmm.
which no one really agrees with, not even the monster. But the monster's like, okay, I whatever, girl.
Yes.
But then also it illuminates how mob mentality develops, which there is a lot of. And so it's very much taking of sides, but it's named survival. And what I like when I was telling you earlier that how you bake in the history, it's evident that even though this is one story about this town and these people, there's another story under it that's begging to be written about the indigenous community and tribes that were there before.
Yes.
In your research, did you find any of that history about who the land was taken from? Because we talk about erasure and we talk about stories not being told and Montana no longer being as diverse as it once was. But even that was the second iteration of that state. And I mean, for sure, you have a line about, homesteading. Well, who do you think they were getting this free land from?
Yes. Yes. So there were the groups who were largest there that I came across. There was a group that was called the Rocky Boy Indians, and they were called the Rocky Boy Indians because their leader at the time was a man named Rocky Boy. And then there was the Blackfoot Nation. There was the Salish Nation, I believe. And then the character who comes at the end is a Métis individual, a Métis man, who are folks from the Canadian side of the border. But the border there was very porous, right? And so my feeling was like, I wanted to, I make mention of folks in there, and I had this guy, Clement Cardinal, show up at the end to have his moment. But I'm going to admit, I felt like I wanted to acknowledge that those histories were there, but also perhaps to say, I think I can tell this story, but I don't know if I can tell that story. And maybe
Mm,
somebody else can tell that story, and I would love to read it. And
me
so,
too.
yes, yes,
And I'm waiting on that story. Don't know who's
yes.
going to write it, but waiting on it. And even in telling this historical story, I noticed, and I'm assuming it was intentional, that you still crafted contemporary issues with, there's a non-binary character,
Uh-huh.
there's LGBTQ romance. I laughed at the scene early on where they're talking about the catalog is going to ruin us.
Yes. Yeah.
And I thought about Amazon.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Why put all of those contemporary issues into this historical book? Or is it only to say, these people and these things have always existed, get over yourselves?
It's to say, literally, as I did my research, all of that was the catalog thing is a fact. So one of the bits of research I did, the Big Sandy area of Choctaw County is the larger county. They had a newspaper called the Bear Paw Mountaineer. And to my great good luck, they have that paper online from like 1902 going up to, I think, the 30s, like almost every issue. And so I just sat down over the process of probably, it was months. I read every issue from like 1910 to maybe around 1916. I would just, on a morning, I would just pull up and read, and it was a weekly, so it's not every day, was the lucky thing. And I would just read through and try to take note of like some little detail. There's a movie coming on this day. This performer is coming. So I could just throw in there that detail. And then one of the things that was in there was this little like write-up that just said, the catalog industry is going to destroy the local business people. And we need to be on our toes. And as soon as I read it, I said, this is the Amazon fight. Amazon and small businesses. Like, and it was so fun in the best part of historical research to go, none of these fights are new. None of this is new. And then certainly the undercurrent of not all of the lone women, but a good number of the lone women, they went out alone to Montana, but then you would, in the write-ups, they'd say like, and they picked a plot of land right next door to their very best friend, Mrs. So-and-so. And you go like, okay, I got it. I got you. But that was all they could do. And then even the thing that was kind of fascinating is like seeing that even in the private journals of the women, they didn't feel like they could talk openly about it. Like anything. Was just, my dear friend Miss So-and-so came by and she stayed for dinner. And then in the next one will be like, for breakfast, Miss So-and-so had that. And you go, oh, okay, I think I see. But like even in the most private space in that time period, there was no way to be
Out. Yeah.
out,
Mhm.
But like all those things, I just was determined again. I said, like, if I find proof of it, then I'm going to put it in. And then the joy for me was to be like, all these things I would love to talk about, they're just there. They were already there. And people were dealing with it then. There's no fight is ever just done, right? Every fight for like space, for freedom, for independence, for power, you fight it, you fight it, you fight it. You think, okay, that fight's done, on to the next fight. And then another year or two later, the forces who oppose you kind of go, oh, we're going to take away that other thing you won 2 years ago. We're going to fight against that. You go, I thought that fight was done. And then the point, of course, is like aluta continua. The struggle continues.
Yeah, it's a historical novel, it's a horror novel, but it reads so contemporary. It's a masterpiece how you put that all together.
I
What
really appreciate that.
You're very welcome. So I want to move to a speed round in the game before I let you go for the
Okay.
afternoon. What is your favorite book?
My favorite book is a book called Corregidora by Gail Jones.
Who is your favorite author?
I feel like I got a nod to the 10-year-old me and just admit it's Stephen King. I mean, the person who I've probably read the most books and loved, it's Stephen King.
What is your favorite time period in history?
I love the Jazz Age, Harlem in the Jazz Age. I mean, I wrote a previous novella that took place in that time, and part of the reason I wrote it in that time period was because I was just loving the research of that time. I mean, you have certainly the Jazz Age, obviously the jazz artists, but you have Zora Neale Hurston running around. You have County Cullen, Langston Hughes. I mean, like it's really like the Justice League and the X-Men and the Avengers just all hung out in Harlem for a couple of years. And I don't know how you couldn't love that time period.
I love that. What do you think is the best book to movie adaptation?
The Silence of the Lambs movie is better than Silence of the Lambs book,
Hmm.
I think.
What is your favorite kind of monster or spirit, whatever, to create?
My true favorite monster is a werewolf, mostly because they're all about all the deep inner passions coming out, you know?
Mhm.
And to me, I feel like that's endlessly interesting because that can turn beautiful, that can turn horrifying, or a bit of both, you know?
If you had a superhuman power, what would it be?
I really like telekinesis. And the main reason I like telekinesis is because I want to push everyone out of my way when I'm driving. Just if I could move them, like get out, get away, get away, get away. That would be all I
Why do
need.
I hear the ludicrous song in my head right now? Oh. As soon as you said it, that's the first thing I heard.
Yes.
No. Name three things on your bucket list.
I'd like to go to the North Pole. I've been to Antarctica, but I haven't been to the North Pole. So I would like to go. I feel like they're almost all travel related. I'd like to see Sao Paulo, Brazil. I haven't been. And then maybe last, my wife's been to Ghana, I think twice. I haven't gone. So I don't know if that all goes under just travel, but
It's three different places. It
I'd like
all
to see
works.
those three places. Yes.
Okay. What brings you joy?
Our kids. I know it's a cheesy answer, but the two of them bring just endless joy. And we during COVID we adopted this very old cat named Penelope, and she's amazing. I would say she helped us, psychologically. She helped everyone through COVID probably a lot more than we helped her. Well, although she's alive, so I guess that's how we helped her.
Okay. And what brings you peace?
Reading. When I can just open up a book and like disappear into someone else's world, that's pretty beautiful. A little on the nose for a writer, but what are you gonna do?
Exactly. So our game is called Rewriting the Classics. Name one book you wished you would have written.
Song of Solomon.
Name one book where you want to change the ending, and how would you do it?
As awful as this is, at the end of Invisible Man, I would have really loved it if he just would have climbed upstairs, climbed up, and just what's there? Just go do something. I understand it's artistic to say I'm going to go up and all, but I almost felt like just go up and get a slice of pizza, just something. So that would be the change.
Like, why are you down here siphoning all this electricity when there's like life upstairs?
Go live. Yes.
I got you. And then finally, name a book that you think is overrated or overtaught and why.
I don't even know if it's taught that much anymore, but Catcher in the Rye. I don't know if that's still taught that much though. Okay, I'll say this. Maybe this will be my hot take, whatever kind of thing. I wish Beloved was taught less so that other Toni Morrison books would be taught. So that, say, Jazz would get read, because I don't think it gets read enough. Tar Baby, even, which is never really at the top of anyone's list. So how about if I say, I wish Beloved was pushed back a little bit in the teaching? Because at least for me, maybe the other truth of it is, I think I read Beloved too soon. So maybe I'm just admitting to my own shortcoming. Like I read it the first time if I'm honest, the first time I tried to read it, I was just like, I don't understand what's going on. I'm completely confused. And in a way, it was like, this was in college. I wasn't sophisticated enough of a reader. And I almost needed to read I needed to go Bluest Eye. And then I needed to go Song of Solomon. Yeah. And I had to sort of build. I had to build to it. And I think sometimes, at least, when they jump straight to that masterpiece, my fear is like, at least just speaking for me, there's a bunch of people you might lose being able to understand all that she is pulling off in that book. And so I would almost say it's like Beloved should be a part of a course called Reading Toni Morrison, as opposed to the one book by Toni Morrison that gets taught. That's the closest I can come to shouldn't be taught.
That hot take. Actually, Tar Baby is my favorite Morrison novel.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So my final question for you today, Victor. When you're dead and gone and among the ancestors, what would you like someone to write about the legacy of words and work that you left behind?
It's funny. It's like I feel like I'm the child of such a pragmatic woman that all I think about when I think about legacy or whatever is I made enough money that my kids could buy a house with the money and pay for college and not be in debt. So if people could look back and say his two kids went to college on the money that his books made, and then they put a down payment on a house and therefore stayed out of the prison of debt in this country, then I feel like I would have done all I need to do as a writer and as a father for my kids.
Hey, man, that is a dream.
Yes, that is a dream.
I love it. That's a great note to end on. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure, for sure.
Big thank you to Victor LaValle for being here today on Black and Published. Make sure you check out Victor's latest novel, Lone Women, out now from One World Books. And if you're not following Victor, follow him on the socials. He's at Victor LaValle on Twitter. And LaValle is LaValle. That's our show for the week. If you like this episode and want more Black and Published, head to our Instagram page. It's at Black and Published, and that's BLK and Published. There, I've posted a bonus clip from my interview with Victor about how his time in a temp agency drove him back to writing. Make sure you check it out and let me know what you think in the comments. I'll holla at y'all next week when our guest will be Dior J. Stevens, author of the poetry collection, Cruel, Cruel.
We all know it, that line from Scandal where Papa Pope is going up on Olivia, right? And he says, what if I told you? You have to be what?
Twice as good.
Twice as good to get what?
Half as much. Half.
And I was told that as a child. I was told it as a teen. I was told it as an adult. Okay, like, you have to be twice as good. Just my whole life I've operated under that, to some detriment of it, is it's a very unfortunate reality, but it is a goddamn reality.
That's next week on Black and Published. I'll talk to you then. Peace.